Okay folks, today we're going to be talking about elasticity of demand, which is section 4.3 of your textbook. And elasticity demand refers to the change in the demand for a good or service based on a change in its price. And so to go into that a little bit more, demand can be elastic or inelastic depending on the type of good or service we're talking about. So something that for which demand is elastic is when a change in the price leads to a large change in the quantity demanded. So for example, if the price rises 20% and demand falls 30%, demand falls more than the price rises, that good is considered elastic. People will choose to go without it rather than pay a higher price. And then the kind of opposite of that is inelastic demand. And when the price changes, the demand doesn't really change. It's fairly stable despite price fluctuations because it's something that people need. So what types of goods are elastic or inelastic? Elastic goods have a large number of substitutes. And so if you are used to buying one specific brand of something and that all of a sudden goes up, there are probably other brands available. They're substitute goods, so it's elastic. And luxury items are considered elastic. So if the price of things such as designer jeans and jewelry rose sharply, demand would go down because people don't really need them. And then inelastic goods are items that are necessary for survival, such as food, medicine, and in addition to that, items that we rely on in our daily lives. And so we tend to rely on gasoline quite heavily. And then even things like cell phones are considered necessities by many people because we rely on them so heavily for communication, for work, for things like that. So those are relatively inelastic as well. And so if the price of one of these things, medicine, groceries, or gas, rose sharply, people would still pay for them. And now we have two different types of demand curves when we're talking about elastic and inelastic goods. And so the curve on the left is inelastic demand. It's a very steep demand curve. And when the price changes a little bit, the quantity demanded changes very much. And then the opposite of that is the elastic demand curve on the right. And that one is a much gentler demand curve, and when the price changes, the quantity demand doesn't change quite as much. And so there are several different factors that determine whether or not something is elastic, and so whether there's substitute goods or services available. If there's no alternative for a good or service, such as a specific medication, the demand is inelastic. For example, if you take insulin, there's no good alternative for insulin. If the price of insulin goes up, you're going to continue to buy it. But if there are alternatives available, then the demand will be elastic. And then the second factor we think about is the proportion of your income of this item. So items that take up a large percentage of your income tend to be elastic. And if the price goes up, you'll no longer buy it. But items that cost little of your income tend to be inelastic. So something that takes up a large percentage of your income would be, say, a sports car. If the price of those went way up, you probably would choose not to buy it. Versus something that's little of your income would be, for example, maybe table salt. Even if the price of that went up, you spend so little money on it anyway that you would probably choose to continue buying it. And then we have whether something is a necessity or a luxury. So if the price of a necessity such as food or water rises, consumers will pay whatever they can afford for it, which makes it inelastic. But if the price of a luxury item goes up, consumers will simply just go without, which makes demand for these things elastic. And so again, to recap, there are a few things that we look at when we're determining the elasticity of a good or service. The first is whether there are any good alternatives. The second is what proportion of income the item uses, and whether or not the item is a necessity or a luxury. And so if the good or service does not have substitutes, uses a small proportion of income, and is a necessity, then it's inelastic. If the good or service has substitutes, uses a large proportion of income, and or is a luxury, then it is considered inelastic. Thanks for following along, and don't forget to take the quiz at the end.